Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of 9 to 5 Faith. I'm here with one of my new friends, Lauren. Lauren, how are you doing today?
Hey, Paige, I'm good. So good meeting with you.
Yes, happy Friday as well. We're getting ready to enter into a weekend. Any weekend plans?
Oh man, I am actually preaching at church on Sunday.
Ooh,
So I need to
fun.
take some time tomorrow and go over my sermon. But other than that, we're just gonna enjoy being outside while also trying to avoid the heat.
Yep,
So that's our plan.
I
What about
feel you.
yours?
I feel you. Oh, I was just texting my husband. I was like, I need a haircut. I need a haircut so desperately right now. And so I was like my stylist isn't available. And I'm like, who can I find that like can get me in a last minute? Cause I'm like so close to picking up the pair of scissors myself. So either practicing great restraint or finding a
It's
new
like COVID when
hairstylist.
we all,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
So can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what you do and why we're talking to you today?
Sure. So my name is Lauren Vander Linden, and I live in Des Moines, Iowa. I work at Principal Financial Group. So we're a Fortune 250 company, and really our mission is to help make financial products accessible to all. We have a lot of employers who lean on us for 401ks, pension plans, ESOPs, any retirement products. We also have insurance and asset management. So I lead our annuities operations area. And so any processing that is needed for people to purchase an annuity product rolls up through my organization. And I married my husband, Travis, and I, like I said, we live in Des Moines. We've been married 2.5, almost 3 years now. So we actually had a COVID wedding. I
Wow.
don't know, Paige, when you got married, but you'll have to
About
tell us.
6.5 years ago now.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you have us beat. You're double the time. But yeah, we got married. We got married during COVID, and things have been going great ever since. And um, I've one thing that I think is important to note is that I have moved around quite a bit in life. It made me who I am. But yeah, Des Moines is home right now. So.
Right now, has it all like why Iowa? Like why Des Moines?
Oh yeah. So I was born here, born and
Okay.
raised here. I lived in Texas for a little bit, moved to Missouri in high school and college, and then I moved back to Des Moines. I love it here. It's a really great city. I think it's kind of a kept secret. But the winter like deters a lot of people away
Okay.
from living here, and I understand
Yes.
that too.
I understand that. A lot of my neighbors are from the Midwest and they are just escaping the snow. It's the only reason why they live here. So
Yeah. Paige, where are you?
I'm in Arizona, so it is hot and
Oh,
sunny here. It is like 113 today. So
that's Yeah, actually, it's around 100 here. The last week has been really hot, but Arizona is where we escape to in the winter. You're so
oh
right.
yeah. We lovingly call you guys all snowbirds
Yeah,
because
yeah,
our freeways get a little backed up during the winters because of all the snowbirds. But
oh
it's always a
yeah,
good time.
absolutely. Great.
So I know nothing of the financial space. Have you always worked in that space? Have you always kind of been doing this? Like, how did that kind of fall into your plan of things?
Yeah. In college, I either wanted to be a dermatologist or a lawyer. And then I did an internship, right? It never goes how you plan it. I did an internship back up in Des Moines for an insurance brokerage firm. And I really just was drawn to finance. I've always liked math. So I ended up majoring in finance and then got a job with Principal when I graduated from Missouri State, actually, with my MBA. So, everyone in this industry says, oh, I never thought I would be selling insurance or in retirement. Like it was never
Right.
anyone's dream. But I was in church when I first started my career, and they were talking just about how God has ordained you and purposed you for your job. And I was trying to connect parallels, and there are so many examples in the Bible about storing up for the winter, and consider the ant who stores up food. And when we think about that, it really is the same for retirement, which is what I work in right now. But there's a lot of applications and biblical discussions around money and how
Mhm.
we're using our money. And so that is how I connected that as I step into this field and continue working in it.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. I think like yeah, there's like two in my mind at least, there's two camps of thought. And like neither of them I think is wrong or right.
Mhm.
I just think that like there's those who are working in their space for like some greater meaning. And
Mhm.
then one thing that I've been taught through just talking through the guests on this show is that God can use where you're currently at in order to bless you in
Mhm.
other areas in your life.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
that has been like a really cool realization that I think a lot in the church we talk about like your purpose and your calling. And like when we say
Mhm.
that, like, I mean, at least my brain goes to like, oh, what's your job? When
Mhm.
really like your job is just one piece of it. And like
Mhm.
God can work through your job in a multitude of different ways that doesn't have anything to do with your job and can do with
Absolutely.
your other life.
Yeah, that is so true. For a while, I felt I probably had that perspective where I felt like, okay, I'm just working, and this is how I make my income. And now, like, what else do I have to do for God? What else
Mm,
do I need to do in order to have my purpose? And while I still do a lot of things kind of on the side, and I have a lot of passions, I do feel like the Lord convicted me and just said, I have you in this space, and this is your mission field, and this is the world that I've put you in. So don't negate it,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
This is very much a calling too. But yeah, it's tough kind of knowing where the line is between your purpose versus your job, your 9 to 5. And
Yeah.
everyone says, oh, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I'm like, well, I love going to the beach. So who will pay me for that? Right?
Yes,
It's like,
exactly.
well, actually, no one will pay me to do that. So I think I need to get a job. So, you find yourself at this crossroads. Is it my purpose? Is it my calling? And I think it all comes down to your perspective, kind of like you were saying.
Yeah. And it's not limited to just one thing. I think
Right.
that's something else that
Right.
like how we talk about it gets distorted a little bit because I'm like it's not just, you know, a purpose. It could be
Hmm.
it's the purpose for whatever season you're in. And
Right. Right.
so I think it was my first episode or the second episode that I did with my guest and she was just saying like she's working in I feel so bad I can't recall right now, but she was working in some just kind of like random field that she like
Hmm.
had never anticipated herself working in, and yet like she was able to work from home and spend
Hmm.
more time with her son. And that was
Wow.
her purpose for
Yeah.
the season. And
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
it's not so like clear and like cookie cutter because I feel
Hmm.
like a lot of the times when we hear people preaching from like the pulpit it's a lot like this is my purpose is to like be a pastor and
Hmm.
like that's their only thing that they're doing and all that, but I'd argue to say that like for the 90% of us other Christians who don't work in full-time ministry, yeah, our lives
Right.
don't look like that.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. My boss actually got saved while I was working for her a couple years ago.
Wow.
And now I did not lead her to the Lord, but it was
Right.
so great having that connection after the fact. And she told us that at her church, in their discipleship class, they said, okay, so you just got saved. Most people, after they get saved, they feel like they need to quit their 9 to 5 and, go live out their purpose in ministry or pursue something. They said, we love that passion, but don't forget that, God has you where you are. And if we all quit our 9 to 5s and did ministry, we would be really ineffective at getting into those places
Yeah.
where lost people are.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I love that. I feel like
Yeah.
there's a more to her salvation story, or I mean, maybe there's not, but like anything else that like you have to say about um like ministering to your colleagues and your
Mm,
boss and all of
yeah.
that in a secular industry.
It can be so hard. I actually had kind of, I don't know if a faux pas is the right way to say it the other day, but I thought that someone was a Christian. I referenced like, oh, just leave it in the Lord's hands. It'll all work out. And I could tell upon saying that they didn't receive that very well,
Mm,
just by their body language. And, it got back to me that they felt I had mentioned religion, and come to find out they've actually lost their faith.
mm,
So it's really tricky, especially when you feel like you're being wise and talking to the right people. Some of the really practical ways that I insert my faith into the workplace is when someone asks me about my weekend, I don't leave out church.
right.
That's a great way to talk about church. If I'm preaching, I'll talk about I'm preaching at church on Sunday, or I'm using this example. And then one thing that I've done is I actually have integrated the Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast.
Okay.
He's the pastor of Life Church, and he has a really great leadership podcast. And it's actually for business leaders. It's not just for Christians or for ministers. I got permission from our HR area, and someone let me do it, right? I didn't fill out a formal
Right.
sheet or anything, but I got permission from our HR area to show these podcasts to people who are wanting to be in leadership or informal
Mm,
leadership.
yeah.
And the number of people who I've had ask me, hey, what was that guy's name, or what church? Like, I actually kind of like listening to him.
Yeah.
It's been really cool to see that. So those are just some ways that I infuse that into the workplace. What
Yeah.
about you, Paige?
I mean, it's rough for me. I mean, not that I'm a closeted Christian at my workplace, but it is very difficult to be able to speak into the lives of people who have very strong opinions against
Mm-hmm.
Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And not saying, I mean, there have been situations where like things have definitely been said against my faith and my beliefs and everything like that. Not pointed towards me, but just like more
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking. Um, and it's difficult also because one, I'm completely remote. I've never met any of my coworkers in person. And the other part too is um kind of the team structure of how we're kind of laid out is very much so um kind of independent in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like you show up, you do your work. If you
Mm-hmm.
have a problem, you go to your leaders. And but other than that, you're kind of on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really interesting dynamic to kind of find myself in. But I'd say more times than not that I'm closeted or shy about my faith or
Mm-hmm.
anything, but it's definitely way more difficult to kind of infuse um any talk about Jesus
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
into my like regular conversations. But
Mm-hmm.
they know I run this podcast, so if they're listening, you guys are welcome to church anytime. Um
That's great. I know,
but
oh, keep
that's
going.
I was just gonna say, but that's about like the extent that I've ever been able
Yeah.
to talk to my colleagues about what
Yeah.
I do in my faith.
It can be so tough too, because you really don't want to be off-putting in your
Yeah.
approach. And yet, if I tried a new supplement or diet pill or whatever that changed my life, I would,
Right.
of course, talk about it with the people that I see every day. Yet,
Right.
Jesus has changed our lives, and it can be
Right.
hard to talk about. I know John Maxwell, he's coached a lot of senior leaders at
Yeah.
Fortune 500 companies, and he will not talk about his faith until he's added value to their life.
Mm.
So before he wants to talk about, his life and what's impacted him, he'll, pause and wait and just build a relationship and build that trust. And I think that there are times where the Holy Spirit prompts you to share your faith and you need to be obedient, but more often than not, it is that slow process of just
Yeah.
building trust that's most effective.
Yeah. No, I completely agree too. And like, if you look at Jesus and his ministry, and like, of course, like Jesus knew all, and so he was able to speak more into people's lives in a much quicker fashion. But I think of like how was Jesus able to specifically minister to people and like, I guess like turn them around. I was going to say
Mhm.
convert, but I'm like, that's not the right word. But like, get them to kind of repent and turn around
Mhm.
in quick ways. And it was through knowing them.
Yeah.
The woman at the well, who had many husbands, so to
Mhm.
speak, and all of that. And I'm like, Jesus demonstrated knowledge of her and her
Mhm.
experience. One, because he's all knowing, and so he knew
Yep.
that. But like as a model to be able to get to know
Mhm.
or to be able to minister effectively to the people around us,
Mhm.
it first comes through knowing people.
Mhm. That is so true. So
Yeah.
good.
I once watched this one YouTube clip. I couldn't remember who it is. Gosh, my brain is just, it's already on weekend mode. But I was watching this one YouTube clip, and it was this guy. He was a Christian guy, and he goes around and prays for people and just kind of interviews
Mm.
people about their faith. And he goes, who you never hear people talk to is like the corner preachers and like kind of the
Yeah.
hellfire and brimstone people
Yeah.
on the ends on the street. And so he went up to them and started asking them questions. And I was like, you know what? Like, just seeing the humanity in
Mhm.
in everyone,
Yep.
like
Yep.
in everyone, was he was able to like go up and like pray for these people, not in a way that was
Mhm.
like stop what you're doing, but in a way
Mhm.
just like meeting them where they're at.
Yeah. That's so impactful. It's
Yeah.
interesting because in our world today, there might be a lot of offense or a lot of bitterness, and we categorize people. But I would want someone to just come and talk to me if they
Yeah.
had an issue, or if they disagreed with how I lived, or if they wondered why I lived how I lived, even if they don't decide to do that too. I
Right.
would want someone to just talk to me about it. So kudos to him for just
Yeah.
going up and being willing to have the conversation.
Yeah, and with people who you might disagree with their approach and
Hmm.
everything. And um one thing I say to my husband a lot is like, think about how much you think you're right
Hmm.
about.
Hmm.
Sometimes it comes up in politics, but
Hmm.
like even
Yeah.
with your faith, think about how much you're right.
Mm.
That's how much they think they're right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like when you're able to kind of like sit with that and just like marinate on that, you realize you stop demonizing
Hmm.
the other.
Yeah. Oh, that is so good. I thought about that when it comes to, I mean, I think politics is probably the best example that we can all relate
Right.
to, but I just remember seeing a post from someone I know who had voted different than me in the last election.
Yeah.
And what they were saying was exactly how I was feeling. And I thought,
Mm,
okay, so we are more alike than we are different. Maybe
right.
we disagree with the solutions. Maybe we think that, we're not bought in on the other candidate for whatever reason.
Right.
But, we all want a better world. None of us want to be deceived. None of us want people in
Yeah.
power who are going to manipulate us.
Right.
And if you can focus on that commonality, that is
Yeah.
really powerful. That's how you're going to see change and unity.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like the one thing that I kind of rely on, especially when it comes to politics, but I also think like for the majority of people. Of course, there's the people who like just up and turn their back on God and like curse him
Right.
and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I would say the majority of people, don't fall as like Satanists.
Yeah.
But I think like for especially in politics though, we all kind of agree on the destination.
Yeah.
For the most part, we all
Yeah.
agree on the
hmm
destination. It's
hmm
the how you get there
Yes.
that matters. For
Yes.
example, and
Yeah.
like not even saying what I believe, but like think about like the topic of like abortion, for example.
hmm
People who want abortion to be, freely accessible and easy, what are they doing? They're caring for the mother, right? Like
hmm
they're like, okay, like we want to make sure that this woman is taken care
hmm
of.
hmm
Well, people who are against abortion go like, oh no, we want that too. Right?
Right.
Like the destination is the same, but how
Yes.
you get there is very different. Same with
hmm
like religion. And I'd argue to say like most people want to end up in heaven, right? But like
Yeah.
we
And most
know,
people want eternal life, right? I mean, like
right.
most people question what happens after death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like I think the biggest disagreement is like how do we get there? Like
Yeah.
how like what's the how? We
Yeah.
want to end up in heaven.
Yeah.
What's the how? And so I think like when we're able to, and not to say there are multiple ways to get to heaven. I ain't preaching that. Jesus is the only way. But I think people are asking themselves that. And I
Yeah.
think that when we are able to realize that like we're kind of all asking or after the same destination, it kind of like puts a calm
Yeah.
in the room and gets everyone
Yeah.
kind of like on equal ground a little bit.
Yeah. 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 I think a lot of people, when I see them get fired up the most, they're fired up because they think the other person, party, whatever issue it is, doesn't understand what we're fighting for. And if you can
Right.
say we have common ground of what we're fighting for, then I think you've taken the first step.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So now kind of realigning to the beginning of our talk when you were saying like, oh, you're doing a sermon this weekend, which is very exciting.
Oh yeah.
Um, what does your like weekly church
Mm.
involvement look like? And then I'll also tack onto that, like, what does your daily relationship with God look like?
Yeah, I love it. Before I answer that page, I have to
Yeah.
laugh that we have already broached religion and politics, which are the two things you're not supposed to talk about in the workplace. So we're
Very
going deep
true.
on the podcast
Very true. But
today.
I will say it depends on what side you are on because
Yeah,
because that was kind of what I was talking about earlier is
yeah,
like I am not okay to talk about my religion, but if you are agnostic or, atheistic and everything, it is okay to kind of curse God or like roll
sure.
your eyes at Jesus believers or something. So
hmm
you are allowed to
hmm
talk about it, but it has to align with the current what's
Yeah,
the hot ticket of the
yeah,
moment.
yeah. And sometimes you just wish that like the freeway worked both ways,
Yeah.
that there wasn't
Yeah.
a traffic jam on one side.
Yeah.
But as Christians, that's one of the best ways we can shine our light is though they're trying to offend us, we refuse to take offense.
Yeah.
I mean, and we'll even cater to their offense, right? I
Yeah.
mean, to an extent.
Yeah.
Um, but
I think
I
also just
completely
like
agree with
looking
you.
out for those things to where like you can speak truth and accuracy to situations. I'll give you
Mhm.
an example. My work,
Yeah.
um, I work for an HR solutions company. So we are all about the representation, legality, fair,
Mhm. Mhm.
inclusion, all
Yeah.
of it. Like that is like there. Okay. Like
Mhm.
more so than other companies, I will say.
Mhm.
And so one thing that my company does that we have a really great communications team. I'm on it. But
Biased, but
uh,
it's fine.
biased, but we're great. No, we have a really solid communications team and even an internal communications team.
Mhm.
And
Awesome.
like my company is a couple thousand employees, like it's a pretty big
Wow.
company.
Yeah.
And And one thing that they put out, like, a ton of internal comms, meaning, like, anytime you wanna know, like, when there's a all hands meeting, that comes from internal
Mm-hmm.
comms for those listening who are like, "I don't know what that is." Or, like, if there's, like, if everyone's getting the day off or the day after Thanksgiving, like, they're the people who kind of arrange that and make sure it's communicated to everyone. And
Gotcha.
so, around Christmas of last year, because I have noticed a tendency of just not in our industry, but just like culturally speaking, of,
Mm-hmm.
like taking the Christ out of Christmas, like, doing that whole
Yes.
thing of like
Yeah.
not really understanding like what Christmas is about, and same
Yeah.
with Easter. And
Yeah.
there's been like, when you talk about Hanukkah or like any of like the big Jewish holidays or Ramadan even, right? Like you get a full and accurate picture of what those religious holidays mean. Whereas like
Yeah.
Christmas and Easter, you don't really. And so I paid
Yeah.
specific attention at my work for Christmas and Easter this past year, um, to see how they talked about
Mm.
Christmas and Easter,
Yeah.
and if they accurately portray
Mm-hmm.
the religious holiday that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And they did. But, like,
Wow. I'm
yeah, they did.
shocked.
They, like, said, like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is a Christian holiday where they
Cool.
believe, like, Christian or Jesus was born to a Virgin Mary," or, like, when Christians believe that this is when Jesus was crucified and all of that
Wow.
stuff. And I
Wow.
was just, like, looking out for that, because not that I
Yeah.
wanted to do a gotcha moment in case they
Mm-hmm.
didn't, but really I wanted the representation of Christianity to be accurate in my
Yeah.
workplace. And so
Yeah.
that is just like a little something that, like, if you guys have anything like that at your work, that is something you can pay attention
Yeah.
to as well.
I love that. It's so cool that you were probably in a position where you could have had influence too, but they were already on it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so
They were
cool.
already on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, the question. So
Back
it
to
was,
you.
yes. So it's, what does my church involvement look like, right? Okay, this is I'm excited to answer this question.
Yay.
So when I first moved up to Iowa, I was a part of a church plant. I still am at that church. But the church was launching. It was a new church. And our pastor, I had known from when I was younger. His dad was actually my pastor growing up. And he was moving back to Des Moines and starting a church. And I was moving back to Des Moines for my corporate job. And I was on the worship team at a pretty large church down in Missouri. And I told him, I'm happy to be on your worship team, happy to be at your church, and I can send you resumes of people who are on the worship team, or,
Yeah.
resumes of people who would be good worship pastors. And eventually he was just like, yeah, you're going to be our worship pastor. Like, I don't have, budget to hire. I don't
Right.
have contacts. No one's moving to Des Moines for this. Like, you're going to be it. And reluctantly, I stepped into that role. And honestly, it was great for a season. I probably let it go on a little too long. I think it's important to not confuse spending time with God versus spending time working for the church,
Yeah.
or volunteering in any capacity. Both are important. Please, if
Right.
you're volunteering at your church and you're not spending time with God, before you stop volunteering, um, figure out a rhythm for spending time with God. Don't just blame volunteering and quit everything to do with your
Right.
church. That's an
Right.
important piece of being a part of the body of Christ. But for me, that line definitely blurred,
Yeah.
where I felt like just because I was doing things for the church, I was spending time with God. And it can really leave you feeling depleted. And, for me, I was go, 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 busy all the time. And I didn't do a great job of setting boundaries. Something that I learned is that, the person who's asking you to do things, they're not wrong for asking.
Right.
They don't know your capacity. They don't know if you want the opportunity or if you don't. You have to set that boundary for your own life.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things I learned. So working a 9 to 5 job that, as time went on, it got harder and harder. I probably should have stepped down from the leadership position a while ago because I
Mm,
was volunteer.
yeah.
But, God has timing for everything. I felt like he was calling me to step down very clearly. I delayed it a little, probably a little too long. And I had a conversation with my pastor just saying, hey, I'll need to step down by April of next year. And I felt like at first I was going to say, actually, I could probably go till September if needed. I really felt in my spirit, don't say that. April of next year, like
Yeah.
Easter of next year is what it's going to be. So I held firm on that date. And sure enough, I started an author school the same week that I stepped down from serving as the worship team leader. And
Mm,
I felt like God was preparing me for that. Had I been disobedient, I never would have written my book.
right.
So I think it's all a balance of spending time with God and making time to volunteer at church, but you can't do it all. And I
Yeah.
probably learned that the hard way.
Yeah. How do you think that churches can not better cater to people who work full time, but like offer the bridge of understanding to
Mm.
that?
It definitely depends on the church environment that you're in. I think it takes some conviction on your part to say, even if you don't understand why I can't serve this week, this is important for me.
Mm,
And I don't have a good reason. Like I'm in town. I don't have
yeah.
anything else going on. I'll be at church, but today's my Sabbath. And I know that if I don't take this day, I will not be able to meet the needs that God's placed in front of me for the next week. So
Yeah.
some of that takes conviction from us to say, I'm not doing anything wrong by saying
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Um, One thing that I am pretty passionate about, and thankfully my pastor has been understanding and always was when I was in the dual role, um, you need a Sabbath.
Yeah.
And for a lot of church people, if you're doing stuff on Sunday for the church and you work full time, I would caution you to not make that a weekly thing where you're doing stuff on Saturday and Sunday for the church.
Right.
You need a Sabbath, and your church should be encouraging you to have a Sabbath.
Yeah.
I feel very strongly in that conviction. Now, there might be pastors who say, well, in the New Testament, we learn that Jesus is our Sabbath, so we can, you know, forget the law of the Old Testament, but you would never say that about any of the other 10
Right.
commandments.
Yeah.
You would never say that murder is now okay. So,
Yeah.
my personal conviction is that churches need to encourage people to take a Sabbath and understand when they do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, like I've been really blessed at the church that I'm currently at in that the way that they treat their volunteers
Mm.
is they treat them as volunteers.
Yeah.
Like they're not whereas like me, I'm like recovering people pleaser and like
Right,
I
me
will
too.
always like I just met I'm going to start working with our young adult ministry and I just met
Awesome.
yesterday. I just met with the young adults director and I was meeting with him and he was talking to me about like, oh, like here's like the different areas that you can serve and here I'm just like, but where do you need help? Because that's where
Yeah.
I'll be. Like I'll help you wherever
Whatever
you
you
need it. Like
need.
I don't care like if like I have to, break down chairs. Like I can do it.
Yes.
I will happily do it if that's what
Yeah.
you need. Always identifying where the need is and they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll get you on the schedule." I'm like, "Well, why do we need a schedule? I'll just show up every week."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there's things like that
I'm
where
your
like
girl.
I have to kind of like remove myself from that. But yeah, I think it's a church culture and I've never been like on staff or like in full-time ministry, but I think
Yeah.
a lot of it is how um I can only presume, but it's how church leadership trickles down the message to like
Mhm.
church staff about these are these are our volunteers,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like they're volunteering our time. And so I mean my pastor gets all throat punchy about that's what he calls them, throat punches, is like
Yeah. Like the worst. Yeah.
the hard truth is the hard truth. I'm gonna butcher it. Hard truth at the right time or said the right way or something like that. But he He straight up said the other day, it was something on tithing and giving and everything like that. And he says, like, this was actually just this past Sunday, but he said to have one kid in in ministry for the whole year
Mm.
costs us $1,000.
Wow.
So if you have three kids, that's $3,000 for the year. Are you giving that much?
Wow.
Because if you're not, you're taking away from the church.
Wow.
Like super throat punching.
Yeah. I
Speaking
mean,
specifically to like the members and the long, not the
yeah, I
first
think,
time people there, but
yeah.
I think it comes from the top down of that message of like, he talks a lot about volunteerism, but the way that they treat the volunteers are
Mhm.
like they're volunteers and not like they're employees. Because I have
Right.
seen it done that way.
Completely. So different. And, there would be people when I was leading the worship team who they would feel so sad, or they would feel so bad like declining a week or taking a week off.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I care about you more
Right.
than I do what you can bring to the church. And
Yeah.
that's hard when you're leading worship and you're like, I care about you so much, but if you decline, we don't have a drummer, you know? But you always
Right.
have to keep that at your forefront. Like, you as a person are worth way more to me. Like, you as a brother or sister in Christ is worth way more to me than if we have to do an acoustic set this week, you know?
Right.
And sometimes I think the pressure of churches being excellent, which we absolutely should be. We definitely strive for a culture of excellence, but that
Right.
pressure can keep us in a place where sometimes it's easy to use people. And I think it's just something we have to be mindful of, because I
Yeah.
don't think it's something anyone intends.
Oh yeah.
And
a
just
hundred
to echo what
percent.
you're saying, I feel like our church has a good volunteer culture. And I think my pastor does a great job. I would hate for any of this to reflect
Oh
poorly on
no,
where I'm
no.
at.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, it's just something everyone has to be mindful of, because
Yeah.
whenever you're on a mission to reach people, we as Christians should all agree that that is the number one mission.
Yeah.
But like, we cannot be Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible all the time. Like, our cortisol cannot
Right.
handle it, right? Like,
Right.
it'll spike out of the wazoo.
Yeah.
So I think it's just important to keep that in mind as you're
Yeah.
serving, and if you're ever leading someone who's serving.
Yeah. And I think too, it's like, that own personal like responsibility of like drawing up those boundaries, like you were talking about earlier,
Mhm.
of like they're not mind readers. Like,
Right.
they are just operating how they know how to operate. But like you can inform them and educate them of like where you're at. Like
Yeah.
earlier this year, my husband had a cancer diagnosis, like a
Oh,
cancerous
wow.
tumor. And at that time, like he was volunteering every other Saturday, and I was
Mhm.
the Saturdays in between. And sometimes we doubled up. And any Saturday that we both volunteered, we did not see each other on
No.
Saturday.
Yeah.
And it was just like a time suck and an energy suck. And I just like told the, volunteer coordinator for where I help out in production. I was just like, listen, like I need to just not have my brain here. Like I need to be putting my whole energy at home right now. And that
Mhm.
was fine. And guess what? In September, I'll probably be back. So,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a balance that like, but it's
Seasons.
something I had to draw for myself.
Right.
And I would encourage any of those people listening who finds themselves in the situation of like, hey, like, did you draw a
Mhm.
boundary for yourself?
Mhm.
Not not to get out of volunteering, but to also make sure that
Mhm.
your whole self is healthy.
Mhm. I think you hit the nail on the head. I want to tell a story about
Yeah.
someone in the professional environment, but just to respond to that, um, it's easy to look at what we're doing and say, well, I have other dreams, and the volunteering at the church might be holding me back. If you're not working on those other dreams, volunteering at church is not the thing holding you back, right?
Right.
Volunteering is a really important part of being in the body of believers, but it's coupled with setting that boundary.
Right.
And so the boundary story that I want to tell you. So I work for a Fortune 250, similar to your business page. It's a large company. I worked in investor relations for a period of time, which is when we do earnings calls with
Yeah.
the stock market, right?
Right.
So at that time, it was earnings call season, and our new CFO had just been announced, and she was kind of stepping into the role. And, this would have been like her first earnings call. And we scheduled a meeting at 4 p.m. to go over things. Now, earnings call, you're usually working until 10 p.m. for 2 weeks straight.
Right. Right.
So we scheduled a meeting at 4 p.m. within the 8 to 5 work hours, and she declined it and said, I can't. Connor has a basketball game, so I need to go see my son's game. And I just could not believe that our new CFO was able to set a boundary like that and still
Yeah.
be promoted to CFO.
Yeah.
She was setting boundaries like this her whole career. And
Yeah.
I'm thankful that my company still decided to promote her. But she set that boundary. When
Yeah.
she got that meeting invite, none of us knew her son had a basketball game. She
Right.
had to set that boundary.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like things that come up with like work and whatnot. I mean, me working in social media, like especially in the beginning of my career, that was like a really hard boundary, mostly because like
Mhm.
I took on way too much work without saying no.
Yeah.
My own
Yeah.
boundary. But like I'd be
Yeah.
working weekends.
Yeah.
And, not that like that time wouldn't, get offset somewhere else,
Mhm.
but I didn't have that boundary in my life to be able to take a Sabbath where I like take a whole freaking day and like
Mhm.
do a whole lot of nothing. But like, even so I work in like the production side, or I volunteer in the
Mhm.
production side at my church, which means I run their social media live streams, which is also what I like. I don't run live streams, but I'm on social media every single day because that's what I do for work. And
Yeah.
so I've told people, and like this is like the firm thing. I said, I will volunteer Saturday or Sunday.
Right.
I'm
Right.
not working on social media one day of the week.
7 days. Yeah.
Right, right. Like I need at least one day to not
Yeah.
do it.
Yep.
Like, I always say like if it's a pinch and you really need someone, like sure we can talk about that. But like this is something that I'm setting for myself of like, hey, like I need a day off of working off of social media.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yeah, it's just like how you go forward and how you set those
Mhm.
boundaries. And I think too, like even stepping into a secular workplace, it might not be a basketball game, but it's working on the weekends. Sorry, like unless you work for like
Yeah.
Chick-fil-A or a bank or something, like you might have to work a Sunday,
Mhm.
like
Mhm. Yeah.
right, or whatever day you
Right.
decide for your Sabbath.
Yeah.
So, that's a hard boundary to set, but I always advise people do it at the beginning because it's easier to do it at the beginning and hold it up than like start
Mhm.
something new.
Yeah.
But
Completely agree.
that's just my own 2 cents.
Ugh, I totally
Mm.
agree. It's so important. It's
Yeah.
it's cool to see that we're on the same page with it too.
Yeah.
You definitely, you need both. I hate to see people use it as an excuse to not serve.
Yeah.
Um, but most people I've found, they're using serving as the excuse to not Sabbath, and
Mm.
you need both.
Yeah. I've never really thought of that, but like I think that's like
Yeah.
a really good point. Like
Yeah.
especially, and I mean especially for like the people who are doing the serving like above and beyond,
Mhm.
kind of like what your typical churchgoer is probably doing.
Mhm.
I think those are the people, I what is it, the Enneagram twos, the twos who are just the
Threes.
helpers.
Oh, the twos are the helpers and the threes achieve. So
Yes, the twos and the threes. We need to have a talk. Like
yeah, I am a three and I'm a three wing too.
Yep,
So
there you go.
Um, yeah, that actually it's interesting because I know in our dialogue before the podcast, one of the questions you asked was, what's one of the hardest things you struggle with your faith? And mine would definitely be earning my salvation, earning right standing with
Mm,
God,
yeah,
thinking that, a performance-based faith.
yeah.
If I didn't read my Bible today, it's you know,
A
a
ding.
-1. Yep, it's
Yeah,
a ding. If I didn't read it in the morning, because it needs to be first fruits, it's a
yeah.
ding. And my grandma really spoke some truth into my life recently, and she was a pastor's wife. My grandpa was a pastor, and, she just said, "Lauren, I couldn't get up early for, 21 days of prayer, or even just like they had a Friday morning prayer service. She's like, I felt like I was going to throw up the rest of the day. Like
Yeah.
I slept in, I went and did my job, and then I spent time with the Lord when I got home. And I think remembering that, if you convince yourself that by volunteering more and more and more that you are somehow in better standing than the person who has set boundaries, I hate to break it to you, but you are only wearing yourself out.
Yeah. 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 And then also like it's like a heart posture. I mean, like
Yes.
it's like the work thing. Like none of us want to work. Like, but like we
Yeah.
end up we do it. And same with
Yeah.
volunteering. You're not always gonna want to volunteer, but like it is something that like that is sorry. That is something that we are called to do as the body of
Right.
Christ.
Right.
And taking it into that versus like I'm achieving, like I need to get this
Mhm.
done. I need the A+, I
Mhm.
need the gold star.
Yep.
There's different heart postures and
Yeah.
um I think at the end of the day, like that's what it really comes down to, at least for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So important when you're serving. I'm glad
Yeah.
you hit the nail on the head with the heart posture
Yeah.
in anything, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. I always like to end our show with one very fun question is what is something that our audience can walk away with today after listening to this episode and they can go and do to help them grow their faith, whether it's a practice or a
Mm.
discipline, and not doing it for the gold star, but doing it for something else, doing it for our faith growth
Yeah.
and relationship with God.
I think one of the biggest things is, especially for people who are working full-time jobs, or have really busy schedules, maybe your kids wake up early in the morning, as early as you, and you just can't fit in a Devo. Don't underestimate what one verse, what
Mm.
2 minutes of prayer, what one worship song where you turn it on and you're able to shut out the rest of the noise can do for your spiritual health.
Mm,
Um, I've seen that in my own life where when I even just don't go to bed unless I read one verse of the Bible, I am amazed at how God uses one verse to reset my
yeah,
heart, get me in a better, posture, have more faith for things. God's word is living and active. So
yeah,
don't underestimate what even just one verse can do. Don't get in the mindset that because you can't spend an hour on a Saturday morning in God's word, that he's not going to be able to change your life and impact your life through it.
yeah,
And then just another tangible thing with that, for me, listening to worship on a regular basis or even just Christian music really helps keep me connected to the Lord when maybe
mm,
I am not prioritizing quiet time with God.
yeah,
And of course, I always want to, but I don't.
yeah,
That's just the reality of it. But I always notice a difference when I start listening, and not that all secular music is bad, but when I start listening to different things, worship music is what resets that mindset in
yeah,
my heart, and it helps me be the best version of me without really thinking about it.
yeah.
So I would
Huh.
encourage your listeners to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I definitely work out to worship music and Christian
Oh, yeah.
music.
And KB, you listen to KB?
Yes, yes, I
Oh,
have.
yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll put like this in the episode link, but I have an entire playlist and it's all
Oh,
it's all clean Christian rap.
yeah.
But it's like it's a good playlist and it's
I need to follow it.
45 minutes long, but it's like a good workout playlist and I call it
So
clean gym
good.
jams and that's
Yeah.
like my workout that I usually go to. So
Oh,
I'll
I
have
love
to
it.
link that
Definitely
in
put
this
it in the
episode.
notes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, Lauren, where can people find you? Where can they learn more about you? Get in touch if they want to follow you and your musings.
Yes, you can find me on Instagram at Lauren.vanderlinden. I have a long name. My husband is Dutch. So
That'll do it.
you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on YouTube if you search Lauren Vander Linden. I have sermons that will come up. And I actually have a book coming out in the spring of next year, spring, summer of next year. And I'm so excited. I think it's really going to help people. It's all about forgiving, releasing bitterness, and moving on from past hurt.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much, Lauren, for
Yes.
joining us. It was a true, true pleasure. And we'll catch you guys next week.